Today, of course, we celebrate the Solemnity of Christ the King, which marks the end of the liturgical year. And I don't know about you, but whenever it comes to this time of year, when it comes to Christ the King, I always forget what the Solemnity is all about, so I always have to look it up. Fortunately, there's Wikipedia. So, the Solemnity of Christ the King was established by Pope Pius XI in 1925 by way of his encyclical called Quas Primas, which is Latin for "in the first." And so, as a matter of background, just to kind of paraphrase what the Pope basically says in the context of the encyclical, basically there's never been a golden age in the history of the Church. So, rather than lament the passing of a time gone by, we're always called to be present to this age. And more to the point, to come up with generous and creative solutions to the problems obtained in this particular age, again, as opposed to lamenting the passing of a time gone by. And so, to use a really easy example, think about the 16th century. So, all sorts of evil and wickedness in the world, all sorts of evil and wickedness in the church. As a result of which, a lot of people fell away from the church. A lot of people established their own Christian communities, otherwise known as the Protestant Reformation. At the same time, a lot of people took a different approach. And so a lot of people like St. Ignatius, St. Charles Borromeo, St. Catherine of Siena, instead of stepping backwards, they stepped forwards. The Catholic Counter-Reformation. To use another example, think about liturgy, right? So imagine the early church, early Christendom, all sorts of people being persecuted, all sorts of people being martyred, as a result of which the church established all sorts of feast days associated with saints and martyrs and the Blessed Virgin Mary to encourage people to live from a standpoint of heroic virtue in the midst of difficult times. With that in mind, Pope Pius XI established the Solemnity of Christ the King in response to what? Secularism. So basically the whole idea was that in response to the secular age, which was basically leading people to indifference and even a certain hostility with regards to the Christian thing, he established the Solemnity of Christ the King to remind people about the primacy of Christ the King, to be established in our hearts, but also in the context, obviously, of the world. So once you understand the historical origins of the Solemnity, hopefully you can see why it has enduring relevance to this day. So the example that comes to mind, a couple weeks ago I attended this pre-seminar hosted by the Archdiocese of Toronto, which was about evangelization. And more to the point, it was about how to stem the tide of people leaving the church in this really difficult age post-COVID. The seminar began with a bunch of different stats dealing with mass attendance. So in the Archdiocese of Toronto, with regards to weekend mass attendance, from 2014 to 2019, there was a decline of like 8.8%, so roughly 10% from 2014 to 2019. Now, from 2019 to 2023, so in the aftermath of COVID, even more dramatic, so a decline of 23%. Now, it kind of begs the question, like, what's the reason why? And when you look at the data, there's a clear demarcation between the before and the after. Before COVID and after COVID. So before COVID, it's pretty clear. The thing that was driving people away from the church was the culture, whether we're talking about secularism or individualism, right? Post-COVID, it's kind of interesting. The threat of the culture still endured, but on top of that, now there was fear. Now there was a loss of habit, the loss of a sense of duty, the loss of a sense of obligation. You put it all together, why are people leaving the church? And it's not so much because of scandal. It's not so much because of disputes with regards to doctrine. Certainly that is a factor from time to time, but predominantly it's because Jesus Christ is not at the center of people's hearts. And so as a result, people are shaky. So once you introduce fear, loss of duty, loss of habit, loss of obligation, people fall away. People fall away because in retrospect, they never actually had deep roots. Now when you hear stats like that, it's kind of demoralizing. So I want to balance it out by giving you some more positive examples which remain on point. A historical example, but also a contemporary example. So, perhaps you've heard about this time called the Dark Ages. So in the aftermath of the fall of the Roman Empire, there was a period of like 900 years, stemming from the fall of the Roman Empire to the beginning of the Renaissance, otherwise known as the Dark Ages. It marked a certain massive cultural decline in the context of Europe. But in the context of the Dark Ages, there arose this amazing saint, Saint Benedict. And Saint Benedict, basically, he founded a bunch of monasteries based on the so-called Rule of Saint Benedict, which of course he composed. And it was built around this idea of prayer, the sacraments, living the church's life in a really authentic sort of way. Because of the rule of St. Benedict, because of these different monasteries founded in Europe at this particular time, a lot of people, they were able to endure the Dark Ages. Now, what's interesting, Pope Benedict XVI, he talks about this, and he says, you know what, in retrospect, St. Benedict, he wasn't trying to reform anything. He wasn't trying to change society. Basically, just to paraphrase, he looked at the world, and he thought to himself, well, look, the world is basically going to hell. And so now, especially now, it's really important for me to focus on what's important and what's essential, to adopt a certain kind of listening heart. What does the Lord want me to do? Who does he want me to be? To focus on that, because there's no more time to waste. Now, what's interesting, when you have that approach, that is the thing that changes society. That's the sort of thing which changes the world. And that's why, to this day, St. Benedict is known as the patron saint of Europe and the father of Western monasticism. One final example on with this. So as many of you know, my best friend in the whole wide world is a priest from the Archdiocese of Halifax, Yarmouth, Father Craig Cameron. And basically, Father Craig Cameron has 1 million portfolios. He has 1 million jobs. So he's a chaplain of the various post-secondary institutions in that area. He's the director of the cathedral. He's in charge of liturgy. He's the vocations director. Pretty sure he does his own laundry. He has a lot of stuff, right? And on top of that, in addition to these things, he has arranged for the Archdiocese to rent out 2 houses. There's a men's house and there's a women's house. And they're built on this rule of life, not unlike the rule of St. Benedict, which Father Craig himself came up with. So it's built around prayer. It's built around service to the parish, service to the community, examination of conscience, that type of thing, right? He's had these 2 houses for only 3 years. And in 3 years, from the men's house, 2 guys are now in the seminary, studying for the priesthood. The number is actually 3 if you add on another guy that he's worked with through chaplaincy. From the women's house, there's 3 women who are actively discerning a potential call to consecrate virginity. 5 or 6 people who are discerning really important vocations in 3 years. Now, obviously, it kind of begs the question, like, how, right? If you read between the lines, these people are going beyond a mere formulaic approach to the faith. So it's not like they're simply saying prayers or simply going to Mass. They're bringing to the table a certain intentionality, a listening heart. The stakes are really high right now, so it's really important for us to focus on what's important and what's essential. What does the Lord want me to do? Who is he calling me to be? Once I discern that, I give my heart entirely to that. I run in the direction that God wants me to run. If you have that mentality in terms of how you live your life, that's how you change yourself, and that's how you change the world.